Hello and welcome to your video lecture on section 17.6 on the adrenal gland. We will also discuss section 17.7 and 17.8 in this video. So we'll start off with our adrenal gland, as we said, and first let's understand where the adrenal gland is. We find it sitting on top of the kidney as a retroperitoneal structure. And I like to call this the party hat of the kidney. I've mentioned that before. And we see that there are two distinct regions here. So we have an outer or external cortex and an inner adrenal medulla. Our adrenal cortex is going to produce steroid hormones from cholesterol, known as our corticosteroids, and we divide this into three regions. You can see these regions in this histology view below. First, we have our zona glomerulosa, then we have our zona fasciculata, and lastly, our zona reticularis. This is the innermost layer and makes contact with the adrenal medulla. So if we were looking at this image, out here would be where my zona glomerulosa is, and deeper in here before the medulla is where I would have the zona reticularis. So with these three regions, they are going to release different hormones. Starting with our zona glomerulosa here, this thin layer, this is going to release our mineralocorticoids. And the specific one that we really talk about is aldosterone. Aldosterone helps us with electrolyte balance within our kidneys, and their main job is to resorb sodium, and as a result, we will also resorb water because water always wants to go where sodium goes, where salt goes. So the way I remember this, and no offense to Aldo, this just helps me remember this function of this hormone, but I always like to think of Aldo workers as being salty. So that helps me remember that they are going to, or aldosterone rather, is going to resorb sodium, and water is going to follow. Next area is the zona fasciculata, and this is going to produce glucocorticoids such as cortisol and cortisone. And so that will help us influence our metabolism of glucose, protein, and fat. And this is controlled by ACTH, which was released from the hypothalamus. Or sorry, not from the hypothalamus, from the pituitary gland. Our corticotrophin releasing hormone is what's released from the hypothalamus, which then tells the anterior pituitary gland to release ACTH. That travels here to our zona fasciculata, telling it to produce and release glucocorticoids. All right, last layer is going to be our zona reticularis, and this produces androgens, or our adrenal sex hormones. So this would include testosterone, which we know is going to influence masculinization. Beyond the cortex, we have our medulla, and this is going to release hormones when our body is under stress and consists of hormone-producing cells called chromaffin cells. So we talked about these chromaffin cells earlier, and they are going to release epinephrine when they are stimulated. Epinephrine is also known as adrenaline. So when our chromaffin cells are stimulated, 80% of the hormone released is epinephrine. The other 20% is norepinephrine, also known as noradrenaline. So what does our epinephrine do? It's going to help elevate blood sugar. It regulates our body during stress or anger and raises blood pressure, heartbeat, glycogen breakdown, because we need that glucose for fight or flight, and increases all other sympathetic effects of our nervous system. And by having our adrenal medulla functioning in this manner, we are able to help maintain our blood pressure. So here are some more of these effects of our epinephrine and norepinephrine, and we can relate this to the effects we discussed of our sympathetic nervous system. So we're going to signal our liver and our skeletal muscles to convert glycogen which is going to be these long chains of glucose molecules, into just our glucose molecules. So essentially, we're just breaking these bonds and using the glucose in the areas that need it. So usually with fight or flight, it's going to go to our skeletal muscles. The hormones will increase our heart rate, pulse, blood pressure to prepare our body for fight or flight. And we will know that our airways are going to dilate. We call this bronchodilation, which allows us to be able to ventilate more, bringing more air into our lungs that can help move that oxygen into our blood, so that will raise our blood oxygen levels. Will also prompt vasodilation. So here's our normal artery. Vasodilation means that the muscle in here is relaxing, opening up that lumen, and this can help increase oxygenation of our important organs such as the lungs, our brain, heart, and skeletal muscle. It can also trigger vasoconstriction in some areas where we have less essential organs. So for instance, we don't want this blood really in large volume going to our gastrointestinal tract, our kidneys, skin, and it will downregulate some components of our immune system. So when you're in fight or flight mode, you're not concerned about digesting your food and getting blood flow over there, right? So this is a good example of where vasoconstriction takes place in our sympathetic response, whereas in other areas that have more of those vital organs, we'll have vasodilation. And other effects are going to include a dry mouth, loss of appetite, pupil dilation, and loss of our peripheral vision. Now let's move into section 17.7 on the pineal gland. This pineal gland is what I like to call the tail of our thalamus, and it is going to be located in the roof of the third ventricle of the brain, known as the epithalamus region. And it's composed of special secretory cells called pineal cytes. And we've already mentioned that the hormone that the pineal gland secretes is melatonin. We start to see that the concentrations of this hormone will rise and fall depending on the time of day. Levels are going to be the lowest during our daylight hours and the highest at night. So you may have heard of somebody taking melatonin pills to fall asleep at night. And that's because melatonin goes up at night. And so this is going to help us maintain our basic circadian rhythms. It also helps protect against tissue damage by acting as an antioxidant, and that protects the central nervous system from free radicals such as hydrogen peroxide. And we may have a role in reproductive development and functioning. For instance, before puberty, we are inhibiting the gonadotrophin releasing hormone. So if we inhibit that, then we no longer will tell the anterior pituitary gland, I shouldn't say no longer, we never will secrete LH and FSH. So that keeps us prepubescent. And then when the right time comes, melatonin may trigger that reproductive development where we get a release of the gonadotrophin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, which goes to the anterior pituitary gland and tells it to release FSH and LH. All right, now let's move into section 17.8 on gonadal and placental hormones. Starting with our ovaries. This is going to be located in the pelvic cavity. So I've probably shown this to you in lab, but over here is going to be the urinary bladder, and then we could see the uterus back over here. We could see the fimbriae extending out, and the white, doesn't really look white in this picture, but the white almond-shaped structure here is our ovary. And so our ovary produces estrogen, which helps to regulate the secondary sex characteristics such as breast development and pubic hair, etc. It will also produce progesterone, which helps to stimulate the uterus to bring about thickening and vascularization to the endometrium. So the endometrium is that innermost layer within the uterus. And as we prepare to implant a fertilized egg on the uterine wall, we want that wall to be nice and fluffy and thick. So that's what progesterone helps to create. When we see that no fertilized egg is going to implant here, then we start to see the progesterone levels fall and we get the period to take place. Notice how the progesterone levels are very low as that period takes place. That's when the layers of cells are sloughing off here, and the spiral arteries and veins in the uterus, specifically the endometrium, are going to spasm and contract, and essentially they're kind of going to open up and cause the bleeding. So as time goes on, progesterone starts to increase and we rebuild that uterine wall. If no egg is implanted again, we have the period take place. What about the testes? The testes are going to be located in an area known as the scrotum outside of the abdomen. And its job is to secrete testosterone, which is our male sex hormone. And that brings about our secondary sex characteristics, normal sex behaviors, and the production of sperm. Now, if you remember from our previous sections, our gonadotrophin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus is released to the anterior pituitary gland, and that gland then releases FSH and LH. FSH is going to go to our Sertoli cells within our testes and cause our sperm to be developed. And then our LH hormone is going to go to our Leydig cells in the testes and tell it to secrete testosterone that helps to support the sperm production. So I forgot to show that blank. It is going to be the word release. Now, what about the placenta? We certainly don't always have a placenta within our body, so it is a temporary organ that is formed during pregnancy. And typically, this placenta will form near the fundus of the uterus. So here's where our fundus is, toward the top. And its job is to secrete a hormone known as HCG, or human chorionic gonadotrophic hormone. And this helps to maintain the pregnancy and keeps the corpus luteum intact. This is what the corpus luteum looks like. Just to give a quick rundown on what's happening here, this is our ovary. And remember, we had those follicles developing, and the egg is in here as well. The egg eventually gets ovulated, so it's being ejected from the ovary, and these leftover follicular cells become the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum then will stick around for 3 months to secrete progesterone progesterone and HCG until the placenta is built. So this placenta takes about 3 months to build within our body.